Chapter 2. Coffee. When I was at Grandma and Grandpa's house, I woke up every morning to the smell of coffee. The nutty aroma floated up the back stairs and into my room through the transom window above my door. Once I was awake, I tried to separate the other aromas of my grandparents' house. Some mornings the meaty, spicy scent of sausage came up the stairs. Other days the sweet fragrance of fresh muffins. Behind those morning smells lingered the mellow scent of mildew, wood, and ivory soap. To this day, if you dropped me blindfolded at my grandparents' home, I'd know I was there as soon as you opened the door. Grandma and Grandpa lived in a big white 2-story house on Market Street, just a block from the Yazoo River and 4 blocks from the courthouse. Their house looks like a smaller version of the White House in Washington, D.C., without so many pillars in front and not nearly so tall and wide. It's the most comfortable place in the world. Grandma had a few wicker chairs out on the front porch and a porch swing to one side. When it was cool enough, we'd sit out there after dinner. But usually Grandpa liked sitting in the living room in his big wing-back chair, napping or reading the paper. I liked the kitchen best. It's behind the dining room, and you can find your way there by following your nose. Grandma always seemed to have something baking: biscuits, cornbread, cookies, cake, pies. If I wandered in, she'd tell me to sit at the kitchen table while she found me something suitably sweet to tide you over till supper. And after she set a slice of pie or plate of cookies in front of me, she'd open the icebox and get me a cold drink of milk or lemonade. The kitchen was a small room with a large window over the sink that looks out onto the Remingtons' backyard. Grandma had a wooden table in the middle of the kitchen where she did most of her cutting, kneading, and rolling. When it was just Grandma, Grandpa, and me for supper, we ate in the kitchen. When Mom or anyone else was there, Grandma insisted we eat proper in the dining room. My bedroom, Dad's old room, was directly above our kitchen. It had a squeaky old bed with 4 high corner posts and a wooden floor that creaked when I walked on it. If I lay quietly on the bed, I could usually hear the muffled clatter of stirring spoons, pots, and pans down in the kitchen. And, of course, I could always smell what Grandma was cooking. Evenings, Grandpa would sit in the wide living room in the front of the house and read the Greenwood Commonwealth. He relied on the paper to keep up on the news of his old friends in the South, and especially in Greenwood, Mississippi. "Don't care much for the rest of the world," he told me once. "Didn't like Harlan going off to the Navy. American boys have no business fighting other people's wars. We've got our way of doing things right here, and we've got our own problems to take care of, so it's no kettle of ours if commies or Nazis or anybody else wants to go killing each other. They can rot in Hades for all I care." I was used to Grandpa ranting about things in the paper, and I just kept quiet. I'd sit on the floor, looking over the last few days of the Greenwood Commonwealth, rereading Little Abner and other comics I liked. From the kitchen came the sounds and smells of Grandma cooking. I could hear the sizzle of meat frying on the stove, and the open and close of the oven as she checked on the biscuits or cornbread or pie or whatever she was baking for supper. One evening, Grandpa had been reading the paper for a while. Then he swore and snapped it down on the footstool in front of him. "Here, boy, I don't know what this country is coming to. Now the war's over, these damn Yankees are trying to tell us how to run the South. You're still little, but you remember this, son. Our way of life is precious. It's the way I live, the way my daddy lived, my granddaddy and his daddy before him. It's going to be the way you live too, if I have anything to say about it." I had no idea what he was talking about, but I didn't say anything because he had that mad look in his eye that he usually had when he argued with Dad. He went on about the South until Grandma called us in for supper. Grandma could tell Grandpa was stirred up about something when she sat down to eat, so before he could even start, she said, "Now, Earl, you remember our rule. No talking politics at the supper table." "Fine, Florence, I'll just hold all this frustration and nonsense in until tomorrow morning, but don't you go blaming me if I pop open and spray you all like a hot can of beer." His face flushed and he frowned. Then he looked at me and sighed. "I guess there's no need getting little Hiram all upset. Say the blessing, son, and let's plow into Grandma's supper. And Hiram, ask God Almighty if he might shed a little wisdom on them harebrained Yankees and their Mr. Harry Truman." After we finished supper, Grandpa went back to his paper in the living room, and Grandma started cleaning up. I helped carry the plates and things to the sink, but she shooed me out of the kitchen. "I do appreciate your help, Hiram, but I can manage just fine now. Why don't you go on outside and see if you can find R.C. somewhere?" R.C. Rydell lived way down River Road, along the Yazoo, in a dilapidated old house that he claimed had been in Greenwood since before the Civil War. At 9, he was 2 years older than me, but he was one of the few boys my age who always seemed to be outside the same time I was. That night, I swung open the back door and hopped down the steps into the yard. A faint breeze rustled the magnolia tree and azaleas in the backyard, and even though the sun had not yet set, outside was cooler than Grandma's kitchen. I pitched a rock at a stray cat prowling through our bushes. I missed it, but when the rock rustled through the branches, the gray cat dropped low to the ground, arched its back, and hissed. I launched another rock its way. "Hey, watch what you're doing!" R.C. stepped through the bushes and into our yard. He had on the same torn and oversized black kid high tops he always wore. His shirt and jeans were rumpled and dirty, his red hair a tangled mess. He scowled at me like the cat had. "You about put my eye out, Hiram. Ain't your granddaddy taught you about throwing rocks around people?" "Sorry, R.C. I was trying to chase that old tomcat out of our yard. He gets into Grandma's garbage cans." "Y'all want to be getting rid of a cat, you need a good BB gun, not a rock. A hot BB in the butt'll help that old cat remember to stay out of your yard. I'd borrow you mine, but you're too little to be handling a gun." I had never seen R.C. with a BB gun, but I didn't question him. He always told more than he had. "So, what were you doing up in those bushes?" I asked. "You find a nest or something?" "Don't you know nothing, Hiram Hilburn? No bird with half a brain would build a nest in a azalea bush. Naw, I was just in there so I could get a good look at the Remingtons. They's dancing again." Ralph and Ronnie Remington lived behind our house. A couple of brothers who had never married, they lived alone in a southern mansion that probably used to be fancy, but was now run down and surrounded by weeds. R.C. said they were crazy. Grandpa said they were addle-brained, but harmless. Grandma said they were two lonely old bachelors who drank too much. I'd never spoken to Ralph or Ronnie, even though I saw one or the other almost every day. Ralph looked older. His hair had streaks of gray, and he always had a worried look on his face when I'd see him hustling down the sidewalk from downtown with a narrow brown paper bag under his arm. He'd walk down River Road to his house. Then, instead of going up the front stairs and in the front door, he'd follow a path he'd worn in the grass around the side of the house to the back door. Ronnie was heavier than Ralph, and his dark hair covered only the sides of his head. Grandpa said he looked like a fat monk. He usually wore a baggy army uniform with no insignias. "Likely he got that uniform from the Salvation Army shop," said Grandpa, "because even the U.S. Army knows better than to let a knucklehead like Ronnie anywhere close to their business. If Ronnie Remington been in the war, we'd all be speaking German and Japanese right now." Sometimes I'd see Ronnie down at the courthouse carrying mail and papers from one office to another. Charity work, Grandpa called it. Neither of the Remingtons was allowed to drive, so Ronnie walked everywhere in town. He was slow and sort of ambled from one place to another, usually looking for people he knew so he could ask to borrow a nickel. Grandma said he spent all his money on ice cream and cookies, and I guess she was right, because when I saw him strolling home some afternoons, he usually had a small grocery sack clutched to his chest. When Ronnie got near the Remington house, he never walked up the front sidewalk. He had his own path worn through the grass and weeds. It angled from the corner of their yard to the front steps. Funny thing about the Remingtons, Ronnie would only use his path and enter through the front door. Ralph would only use his path and enter through the back. "Shh!" hissed R.C. "They's dancing. Look." He pointed through an opening in the azaleas that gave us a clear view through one of their back windows. Stripped down to their boxer shorts and tank top undershirts, Ronnie and Ralph waltzed by the window. Before R.C. started giggling, I could hear the faint strains of waltz music from their record player. They passed by again and did a slow, awkward turn in front of the window. While Ralph planted both feet, braced himself, and strained to keep his balance, Ronnie leaned back in a deep dip, letting his thick left arm swing wide and high, his pinky finger extended. Shaking with effort, Ralph managed to pull Ronnie out of the dip and continue their 1-2-3 around the room, and I swear I could hear their floor creaking and sagging. When they came by the window again, I could see Ronnie's sweating face framed in concentration, counting out the waltz steps, while Ralph struggled to lead his fat younger brother around the room. They moved like two old cows up on their hind legs. R.C. could stand it no longer and fell to the ground, snorting and choking, trying to stifle his laughter. "Oh, my God," he sputtered. "Can you believe those two hippos dancing? They ought to put them in the county fair." He laughed and snorted louder. "Quiet, R.C. Dang it, if they hear us, I'm going to be in big trouble with Grandma. You know she thinks we ought not to bother Ralph and Ronnie." "Quit being a sis, baby. We ain't doing nothing wrong. They's the weirdos dancing around in their underwear. Grandma says it's not our business what they do, as long as they don't bother us. She told me I had to be neighborly and polite and stay out of their way. R.C. picked up a rock and moved through the azalea bushes toward their house. "R.C., no!" I hissed as loud as I dared. "We're going to be in big trouble if you do." Crouched low and partially hidden by the evening shadows, R.C. wound up and chucked his rock. It cracked against the house just above their window when they waltzed by again. Ralph stumbled and disappeared from view, while Ronnie looked pale and stunned for a moment before coming to the window. "What's that? Who's there? You scat now and leave us be. Who's there?" R.C., still hidden by shadows, let out a loud, low moo, 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 you old cows, and sprinted around their house and down River Road, laughing and mooing all the way. "Who's there? Who's there?" called out Ronnie nervously. "You just go on and leave us be. Just you scat you and leave us be." I ducked back through the bushes and into our yard. Sometimes I didn't like how R.C. played, even if he was older than me. It didn't seem funny at all when Ralph had looked hurtful surprised and Ronnie looked scared. I trudged up the back steps to the kitchen, hoping Grandma would offer me another slice of apple pie when I got inside. Maybe that'd get rid of the bad taste in my mouth.